Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Luis. I'm a third-year medical student from the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health, and welcome to the sixth installment of my ongoing series, Med School Deep Dive, where I interview different medical students from different med schools around the Philippines about their experiences of being a student in their respective med school. In this episode, I interview my friend Nizza, who's a student at Western Visayas State University. But before we start this video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe, as it really does support the channel. And with that out of the way, let's start the video. So hey guys, now I'm joined by my friend Nizza. Nizza, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi everyone, I am Nizza and I'm a fourth year medical student or a clinical clerk from the West Visayas State University College of Medicine, batch Dum Vivimos Servimos, batch TDS. And I'm friends with Luis because we went to UP Diliman together and we were both BS Psych grads.
Okay, so to start things off, Nizza, why did you decide to attend Western Visayas State University for your med degree?
Okay, so for me, I was state university or nothing because as we know, like all of the other private medical schools are very expensive and it just wasn't feasible for me to go to med school if I didn't get into a state medical school. So I only applied to two med schools and they were both state medical schools and I got accepted into West Visayas. So that's basically it. And also, other than the tuition and like the financial aspect of it, it was also important to me that it would be a school with a good board standing because obviously like boards aren't the end all and be all of being a doctor, but it does say something about how they treat their students, how they train their students. And the West Visayas State University College of Medicine has consistently been in the top 10 medical schools for the past few years. So that was something that that was one of the reasons why I strongly considered, and like that's one of the reasons why I applied to West.
Okay, so how would you describe your experience at studying at WVSU?
Like
Like,
the
oh
curriculum.
yeah, what's the curriculum like? Because I've said in previous videos that the curriculum in the Philippines, there's like two schools of thought. There's the traditional subject based, and then there's the module based.
We are the module based.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, we call them blocks. So basically, from your first year to third year, you do all of the learning, and then fourth year's clerkship, you graduate, and then you can do postgraduate internship in any hospital that will accept you. So for the first year to third year, we have 20 blocks, and each block has a different length. For example, I know that in Ateneo and UP, I think you call your blocks modules.
Yeah.
For us, a block is like for example, block 20, which is the last block of third year or the last block, is special census. So for that, we have different modules, and each module is 1 week. So I think for block 20, we had one module for otorhinolaryngology, another block for ophthalmology, or rather another module for ophthalmology, and another module for anesthesiology. And it depends on the block of how many weeks or how many modules it is. Some may be 4 weeks, some may be 6 or 8 weeks. It really depends on the scope of the subject matter.
Okay, so if in your is your module based like you're graded on the module as a whole, and there are no separate subject grades?
Okay, so we have the modules. Like for example, like we have blocks would be ortho, OB, special senses, psych, neuro. Those are blocks.
Mm-hmm.
We have what we call floating subjects. So floating subjects are subjects that we have throughout the year that are parang they're components of the block. Like for example, one of our super stressful blocks talaga was let's say OB, for example. So floating subjects include FCM. Oh wait, no, FCM is a block. FCM is a block,
Oh. Mm-hmm.
I think. FCM is a block in the sense that you have your own grade for family and community medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and you also have your own grade for research.
Mm-hmm.
And you have your own grade for legal medicine or medical jurisprudence.
Mm-hmm.
So they are technically their own blocks, although they are scattered throughout the year. The floating subjects would include microbio, patho, and
Pharmacology.
parasitology, pharma, yeah. So the floating subjects, pharma, microbio, and patho, uh, you would have lectures. Let's say every Thursday morning you'll have a patho lecture, or every Wednesday afternoon you're gonna have a pharma lecture, and these are catered to the block that you are taking. So, for example, if you're taking OB block, all of your micropatho and pharma subjects or lectures are going to be more geared or more specific to OB. And then your grades from the quizzes or exams for those floating subjects uh, will be part of your OB grade.
Okay, it's like that's very similar to what we do in ASMPH, where like there's some floating subjects, but like for the most part, everything, all of our exam scores will just be totaled for that one specific module for where we
Yeah.
took it. As opposed like except for like pharma, where the pharma grade component is separate per year. I mean, per separate per subject, and then the reason they did that was so that we're forced to actually study for pharma because when it was just integrated into each module, it tended that some people would just ally pharma and people like they just forego studying it. So because like cost benefit, they said like, oh, like it won't doesn't affect it that much, so I'll just put more effort into the stuff that will give me more points in the exam. And then they found that a lot of people tended to go down in pharma. So in my school, they made pharma a separate grade, so that we're forced to study pharma harder.
We didn't have anything similar to pharma in undergrad at all. So I feel like that's why it's, like for me personally, that's why it's so much harder.
Yeah, I feel that like pharma is its own subject in med school. And it's like, there's a reason, it's an undergraduate degree and has its own licensure exam. Because this is hard. It is hard
It's
stuff.
really hard.
It's hard stuff. Like
It's
even
really
like
hard.
even the pharma majors in my school, like they don't have an easy time because like there's still so much to know pa. It's like it's just really pure memorization. It's either you know it or you don't know it. Well, anyway, like what is like what is the exam schedule like at your school? Because like in the traditional method, I think they have a major exam week every few like every month or so. But in module based, it's ours is like in my school at least, it's every week. So how is it like? What's the setup in your school?
Poor flashbacks. Okay. I haven't had a module exam in like since March. So because we have like 1 week is one module, right? And then so you study for, like, for example, I'm in module 1 now. And then so my exam for module 1 is going to be at 8 a.m. or 10 a.m. It depends. It depends on your year level. But I'll get to that in a second. Basta your exam for module 1 is going to be on like the next Monday. And then right after that, you immediately go into studying module 2. You're going to have lectures immediately. And then you study module 2, and then you have the exam next Monday. And then at the end of all of it, you have a block exam, which is a bigger exam that tests all of the modules. Where does it get difficult? It gets difficult in your it gets difficult when your floating subjects also have exams in the same week. So we don't really have a set exam week, like you said, like in the more traditional learning method, where it's just a week that is dedicated to exams. We do have weeks with a ton of exams. I think one of the worst weeks we had, or like the heaviest weeks we had, was we had the module exam on Monday, like 8 a.m. And then the same week we had the exam for pharma, we had the exam for microbio, and the exam for patho. And we still had to attend all of the lectures that week from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. because we had the module exam the next week. On top of that, there are also hell weeks where we have like multiple exams. But then we also have SGD and Precept. So
Mm.
those are the weeks where sometimes we sort of wish, or like sometimes we question, what would it be like if we had an exam week? Would it be better or worse? But I guess I'll never know that.
Oh yeah, it's like I find that's interesting because like in my school, we we tend to have like we're kind of like a hybrid between the module system and what the traditional method is. Because like although we have sometimes where our floating subjects have exams, it's usually at the end of the semester. So that's our like what
Mm.
we call compre week. So like it's just an entire week where we have like a comprehensive exam for all the major subjects, and that's where we have our lab exam, and then like that's when like it's like a summary of all the module exams we had prior to earlier in the semester. So that's our hell week right there. Lalo pa when we have MBA classes to also submit stuff for. In WVSU, when do you guys start getting clinical experience? Because like one thing I've noticed is that there's some schools that like as early as first year you start learning clinical skills, whereas whereas other schools you start to get a taste of it really in second year.
For my batch specifically, it was sort of it was like a baptism of fire in a way, because I remember that day very clearly. That in the morning we had the first day of my second year in med, we had our first lecture on history and physical exam, and then I think it was in the afternoon we immediately had to do test and teach, which is basically return demo.
Mm-hmm.
And we were so out of our element. We had like we just learned it that morning, and then we went to the hospital in the afternoon. So it was good in a way that it sort of forced us to frame our minds into thinking now, okay, second year medical student, we're going to the hospital. And then from second year until third year, it just progressed into more preceptorials and more SGDs. For me personally, I really, really like the small group discussions and the preceptorials, because I like cases, and I like sort of trying to look at it from like from a clinical perspective, because I think that's what you really I think that's the goal of SGDs and preceptorials, is to really force your mind into that clinical perspective, which I really appreciate.
But like prior to starting this in second year, had you had like any knowledge of how to conduct a patient interview, or like that's when it's only in second year when you started getting introduced to these types of skills?
We had lectures about it in first year, about how to deal with the patient, counseling, patient interview, yeah. But then like going in depth into like the history and PE only really started in second year, because in first year it's more of the first year first sem. Okay, I think I need to go back a bit.
Yeah.
So you know how when you started med school, you immediately think that in your first month in med school you're gonna start like dissecting cadavers, or
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna start going to the lab and looking at tissue samples or something like that. That doesn't happen in WVSU. In WVSU, our first two blocks are more of like introducing us to medicine as a profession. So we have the lectures on the 5-star physician, we have lectures on how to deal with patients, on the biopsychosocial framework of health. And one of the things that the school is really proud of is the life series workshop. So it's basically where, like, one of the first questions they ask us in first year is, what is life? And then it's this really philosophical, it's not really it's this really philosophical workshop where you have to question, like, what is life? And I think the point of it, so it's like it goes on for weeks, for like the first 2 blocks of med school in between your lectures. And the point of it is to make you really appreciate that when you do go to the clinics, your patient is a human being with a life and with a soul and with a mind. And you shouldn't be treating your patients just as cases, because they're more than that. They're not someone in a textbook. They're like a real individual, and your treatment of them has real life implications. So that's something that I think is unique to WVSU. Are the psychiatrists who forwarded or who created that program actually presented that at an international conference, and I actually wrote an article about it in our school paper. So that's that's something very interesting about WVSU. You go into the real medical thing of medical subjects when you hit block 3, and block 3 is biochemistry.
Oh yes, yes.
So
Everyone's favorite, everyone's favorite subject in
yes,
the
everyone's best subject.
yes.
So that's our first taste of what many would consider to be the traditional med subjects is biochem. So from block 1 and 2, when we reach block 3, that's where you start with biochem, and then block 4 is anatomy, and then block 5 is neurology, neuroanatomy, and then it just gets more and more difficult and more advanced from there on.
Mm. I find it interesting that you guys like put really heavy emphasis on like within the biopsychosocial approach model. There's heavy emphasis at the start on the psychosocial aspects of it, and I think that's important because as it's like medicine, as much as it is a science, it is also an art, and I think the art aspect is your ability to interact with other people, and having compassion for your fellow man goes a long way in like caring for them holistically. But like beyond that, it's like you really didn't get to practice any like skills with if like kind interviewing your classmates and like like on the basics of uh patient interview like in the old carts. You didn't get to experience that in first year.
We did naman. Yun nga, we had lectures on interviewing, dealing with the patient. And then, because at the second half, I don't know if I remember this correctly, the second half of first year, we have pulmo and cardio that I can remember off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
So for those, we do have lectures on, like, oh, so when you see this patient, like how to auscultate or how to listen to heart murmurs and stuff like that. But you don't really put it into practice much until second year, because second year is when you start doing preceptorials. First year, it's all SGDs. And then second year is when you start going to the hospital, interviewing real patients, and then and then you present that to a resident or consultant later on in the week.
Oh, okay, that's quite interesting because like in my school, or as early as like in first year, we already have like learning the basics of the physical exam. Like we actually get to encounter patients, and I think it's similar with UP where we get to do that. I think the philosophy of our school is that we get to practice the clinical skills early on. So like it's interesting that, and I thought that most module based most schools that have the module curriculum would adopt that. But it's interesting that WVSU still prioritizes doing it in second year as opposed to first year. So that's an interesting difference in teaching philosophy. Okay, so moving on. So beyond just your opportunity, like beyond just your learning within the classroom, does WVSU offer you opportunities to learn on your own initiative, such as being able to do additional research beyond what the curriculum requires, such as having like taking like research assistant positions, or like taking electives abroad? Because like obviously like it's a whole new world when you get to experience what the healthcare system is in another country.
I don't think that's part of the curriculum as it is right now. I don't think we don't have the option to, like, for example, during clerkship, we don't have the option to to rotate in a different hospital outside of what the set curriculum is. I know that some other schools have there's a certain number of weeks where they can rotate in an RHU or in a hospital abroad, like you said. But I don't think that, unless I missed something in the handbook or in the orientation, I don't think that that's an option right now.
Mm-hmm. So there's no electives like
Yeah,
the this kind of set in stone, at least as far as you know.
yeah.
Okay, but like as how about for like research? Do you guys get opportunities to do research, like help, like for example, if your any of your professors are conducting a research, are you allowed to like? Do you have the opportunity to act as like a research assistant to them, so you get more experience under your belt?
Never had research assistant actual study, but we did participate in we did act as participants in a study that our doctors conducted, but we didn't help in like the conducting or like the development of the study. And I think the reason why is because for there are 3 years we have to come up with 2 research projects, and I think that takes
Mm,
a lot of our time. We have
okay.
in first year to second year we have to do a pharmacological study, and from second to third year we have to do a clinical or a community based study. So
Mm,
it takes up a lot of our time, and I don't, if there is anyone who's been a research assistant, I don't know them. So so that's the limit of my knowledge.
okay. Well, it's like even though that they don't, it's not probably like promoted as much. And like I find it's pretty cool that you guys have like two opportunities to do full blown research papers, as opposed to like some schools you only get like one. In my school we only have one.
We
Well,
have
then
two.
again we have our MBA paper, so I guess that's our second
Yeah.
research paper. Okay, so um okay, so with the transition to online classes with the pandemic ongoing, what are some of the challenges you've faced with the transition to distance learning, and what have you done to try to face and overcome these challenges?
I think like one challenge is one that I guess all of us face, that no matter where you are in the country, even if you have the best or like the best internet service, it can still get pretty choppy. So there have been times where we have conferences and like I freeze. So just a pro tip for people who are presenting during conferences or didactics, um, pre-record your Zoom sessions. Like pre-record your presentation. There's a like you can add audio to the file, and then it sort of not eliminates, but it lessens the probability that your audio is going to be choppy if you pre-record your audio.
Do you have like any other challenges you face, like adapt, like having to schedule your own time, given that we've lost the structure of med school? Because med school, it's like going back to high school, coming from college where you get to decide your own time, and then you're
Yeah,
back to and then like med school is more structured. So you have to go study from 8 to 5, and then suddenly pandemic hits, and they're like, oh my gosh, we have so much time, but at the same time, I have no idea what to do with this time. How did
yeah.
you deal with that sudden shift in time management?
It was hard. It was really hard because I'm so used to like the 8 to 5 thing. And at that point, when the pandemic hit, I was still recovering. Like I was still feeling a lot of burnout because it was nearing the end of the year, and I had a really heavy first sem, which I never really got to recover from. So honestly, when the pandemic hit, like I think my body just shut down for a while. Like I slept. Obviously, like I would be online when I needed to be online, and I would reply when people would message me. That's my dog, if you can hear.
Yeah.
Um, but it was really a struggle. Like that was the first thing that happened. Like my body shut down. But then eventually, when I was able to recover like some sleep, what I did was I would always I would try to put some structure. So as much as possible, I would try to work an 8 to 5 day. So I would like shower immediately when I woke up just to get myself going. Now, okay, you're not in sleep mode anymore. And then as much as possible, I would try to structure my schedule na 8 to 12 school, and then I have a lunch break, and then 1 to 5 school, depending on what the workload was at that point in time. So for subjects or during the time that there was less workload, um, I I would take some more time to myself as long as I finish the tasks ahead of time. But then there are also times like like the past few days, uh, I checked my screen time yesterday. It was at 16-14 hours, like on my iPad,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what's really um that's something that happens with online learning, that you are really forced to, or rather, you really have to be online, especially if not necessarily because you have to talk to people all the time, but like all of your ebooks are on your phone or your laptop or your tablet. So that's really a big struggle, trying to put structure, trying to utilize the time that you've set aside, and trying not to go beyond that, because we also know that it's not super healthy if you're facing a screen for 12, 14 hours a day.
Yeah, definitely. It's like it definitely takes a toll on your eyes having to stare at the screen for several hours of the day. A lot of if you're just
Yeah.
seated, and like if you don't have a comfortable chair, it's just gonna mess up your back. Like having studied in like medical school for going on to your fourth year, like so you've been in you've been in med school for more than 3 years now. Do you have any advice for any med students any med students entering med school now, and also advice for any current med students?
Always go back to your why. Because I feel, and this is something like going back, this is something that I say to people who are even just aspiring to be med students. If you don't really want it for yourself, I wouldn't recommend people to go into med school. Um, it's very stressful. It's very emotionally and psychologically, financially taxing. And if you don't really want it, it's not, in general, I don't think that people should pursue endeavors, like endeavors that are going to cause them an inordinate amount of psychological stress, and that's going to take a toll on their resources, their time, their finances, if it's not something that they really want. Because it's just not worth it if you don't really want it. But if you want it, if you have if you have a very clear why, then you'll be surprised at how much going back to that why is going to continue to push you to just follow through, and to push you to perform to levels that you didn't think you would be able to perform.
Yeah, I feel that idea like really resonates with me because like I've like said this to I discussed this with many other people, and like I've always find that med school will find ways to break you down, like no matter, like you could be the strongest, you could be like breeze through high school and college, but like the amount of like the amount of workload you go through med school like can really tear anyone down no matter how smart you are. And I feel that like your reason for being there, like who are you doing this for? Are you doing this for the prestige, or are you doing this like to help people? Are you doing this for the right reasons? And I feel that the right reasons will always trump the difficulty of whatever workload med school throws your way. And I feel that that's something that a lot of med students you should really know before committing themselves to this for this long journey of a medical career.
But also that note of like, yun nga, pushing yourself beyond, like pushing yourself to the limit. I also think it's important for us to say that there's nothing wrong with taking a break when you need it, because I see that I feel like there's this culture, not just in med, but like nowadays, like in society nowadays, that there's this pressure to be productive, and there's this pressure to always overwork yourself to the brink of exhaustion. And there are a lot of people who seem to glorify that overworking, and I don't think that's healthy.
Ah, yeah, it's the
Because
toxicity of hustle
yeah,
culture.
yeah, like that's I know that it's a bit, for the people who know me, like it's a bit hypocritical for me to say that, because I've been known for like to drink like 4 cups of coffee a day, and sleep for 4 hours a night. I've been trying to work on that lately. Like in third year, I really tried to work on that. But because that happened to me, like I really saw how it negatively affected my health, like physical and mental. That's why I really try to tell people that you should take a break if your body and your mind are telling you that, you know, you're not, it's a lot, it's too stressful. Learn how to take a break, because the work is going to be there. The work is always going to be there, but you have to take care of yourself so that you are going to be able to do the work, I guess. Like,
Yeah, I get like to synthesize that. It's
there's
like taking a break from productivity
take a
is
break.
actually quite productive in itself. It's like, although that sounds counterintuitive, resting can be productive because
Yeah,
like if you're tired, then you're just gonna do it inefficiently, and that's just unproductive. So like it's productivity is about ultimately doing things efficiently and not spending more time than you have to on a certain task. And I think in med school, people have to learn to realize just do enough to keep progressing, but don't overwork yourself to the point that you won't be able to continue. Because ultimately, med school is a marathon and not a sprint. And what matters is that you finish. Okay, so moving on from there, like moving on from like what discussing like the academic culture in your school. What is the campus culture like outside of the classroom? What is it like to be a student outside of the classroom in WVSU? And like what are some of the extracurriculars that students there can join?
some people, that's a funny question that you phrase it that way, because a lot of people say that in the first semester, like not just first year, like the first semester of the school year, it feels like more than half of our time, not more than half, but like a lot of our time is dedicated to extracurriculars, because in the
Mm-hmm.
first sem, pre-pandemic, we would have Hinampang, which is a sports fest, and
Mm-hmm.
Litmus, or the literary musical competition. So um, on top of all of the exams, which I told you that sometimes we have hell weeks na 6 exams, may lectures pa, may SGD pa, may preceptorial pa, you would see students staying in school after 5, practicing for like for the hinampang, or practicing their like chorales, practicing for litmus, or dancers also practice for lit. It happens in November. So as early as August, September, people are already practicing. So it's a college, and the first to third years compete against each other. So it's a very highly charged atmosphere during the first semester, because everyone's just like they obviously they don't want to embarrass themselves, but they just want to do their best in representing their batch during Litmus and Hinampang, which culminates sometime in November. For me personally, it was really really exhausting in November, because on top of Litmus and Hinampang, I was also a delegate for the APMC regional convention in Visayas. I
Mm-hmm.
was the I was the debate team captain
Mm-hmm.
for our school. And on top of that, November was also the month of the press conference for like within Western Visayas, I think. So I was also the managing editor of the school paper, of the college paper. So that was also so November was the month where everything seemed to come together for everyone. So people are very high stress in November. And then in December onwards, we can finally just go back to being regular medical students.
Yeah, I think like there's a misconception that like when you enter med school, you're basically giving up everything outside your life as a student. But in fact, like most med students have lives outside of the classroom, and I think that should like remain to be the case as as the years go on, because it's the stuff that you do outside the classroom that will keep you sane. Because especially
Exactly.
like because like even in my school we have the joke of Ateneo. ASMPH is the Ateneo School of Medicine and Performing Arts, because like our so
And
many of our so much of our student body is dedicated to doing like stuff outside. Like when it comes to like our craft, like say like whether it's dancing, singing, or sports, like a lot of med students still dedicate some time to that, especially like right when because like even here in Metro Manila, like when Palarong Med comes around, people are really intense about it, and I assume there's a similar culture to that once your version of Palarong Med comes around every year.
Yes, because West Visayas is the defending champ. Yeah, we've been the So it's interesting because in the first sem, yun nga, you sort of compete against the other year levels. So, but then in the second sem, that's when you start training for our version of Palarong Med, which is Medlympics. So I think we compete against the other Iloilo schools and so
Could you repeat
that's
that, Niza?
when
It became choppy. It became choppy again.
okay.
Like could you like yeah restart that entire segment? The other Iloilo schools.
Okay. So we compete so for in Luzon you guys have Palarong Med. And in Visayas, in our part of Visayas, we have Medlympics. And so for we compete against the other Iloilo med schools and the med schools in Bacolod City, in Bacolod. And so if in the first sem we were training as per batch per year level, like, so we can compete against the other year levels. In the second semester, uh, they just get the standout players from each year level to train together and then represent the school. So it's also pretty competitive, but I feel like I've watched Palarong Med actually for when did I watch? Parang 1 year, 2 years na ako nanood ng Palarong Med. I watched it.
Yeah.
So I see that the difference between Luzon and Visayas is that there's just so many more med schools in Luzon.
Yeah.
So I feel like you guys are like super intense. Like
And also the
super,
fact we have so many former UAP athletes.
yeah, you guys are very intense. I feel
Yeah.
like in Visayas, people are competitive naman. It's just that it's not as intense as Luzon. Like Luzon is like very
The
very
school pride is taken up a notch, I think, when it's amongst the big schools in Metro Manila. Because you know, there's a
yeah.
lot of former athletes, so there's a lot of that alpha mentality that I have to win.
Yeah. It's interesting to watch. It's interesting to watch. But for me, as someone who also competes in Medlympics, I always enjoy it because it's so cool to watch people who we have an exam on Monday, but we're still competing on Sunday afternoon. It's really,
yeah.
and then passing the exam on Monday. Like, I'm not one of the people who always passes all of the exams, but I have friends who are student athletes and then do very well in all of the exams, and I'm like, wow, props to you. I like that's something to aspire for. So I try to emulate them. Try very hard to emulate them.
Yeah, I think like it's insane when you see athletes like because I've schoolmates, they're like double athletes, so they compete in two sports and then they still are top 10 in the batch, and it's like how on earth do you have the time to train at such a high level? Like you're basically one of the best members of the team, and yet you are also one of the best students within the class. So like it's like you just have to give props to them that their dedication of balancing both the student and athlete life is probably like on a almost like on in human level of talent.
Yeah, their minds is crazy.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing to see people who are very smart and are also very talented beyond taking exams and doing research. It's really interesting to see now, wow, there really are people who are like that.
And I think if anything, like it gives you inspiration that, you know, you can be good at other things beyond just being a student. Like you can dedicate your time to other crafts and just, you know, like you may not be the best at it, but you know, if it makes you happy, I think it'll go a long way to actually helping you become a better student overall. Okay, so after like having been studying in WVSU for like, you know, going on to your fourth year, what's one thing about being in your school that you really like? And this can be like, like anything like abstract or non-abstract in nature.
What I really love about WVSU is that because it's a state university, it affords people who may not have had the opportunity otherwise to go to med school, the opportunity to go to med school. Like I said earlier, if I wasn't accepted into West, I wouldn't be in med school. And that's just the honest truth.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, because because it um, because it's a state university, it's a state med school, you the students are very varied. Like we have students from Luzon to Visayas and Mindanao, not just from Visayas. And I've been able to meet a lot of people from different courses, different backgrounds, who I don't think I would have met if I went to a private med school. I'm not making, like, maybe I'm making an assumption, but I feel like maybe it's not as homogenous a population as I thought it would be. It's more varied, and because of that, I've been able to meet a lot of people who have, just by interacting with them, challenged me to go out of my comfort zone. And I think that that's an advantage that you get when you go to a state medical school where tuition isn't, or well, where
it's not much of a big deal. Tuition isn't much
like
of a big deal as
the financial aspect is sort of not as much of a challenge as going to a private medical school, for example.
Well, having said that, like you've had the privilege of attending both state universities in Metro Manila and now closer to home. So like how's the experience been now that you're actually studying closer to home, whereas you had to like find your own accommodations here in Metro Manila when you were an undergrad?
It's very different. Very, very different. What I liked about going to college in Manila, and actually one of the main reasons why I went to college in Manila, because I wanted a change in scenery. And the thing about Manila is when you get there, even if you're from there, there's this sense of anonymity that you can have when you go around the metro versus here in Iloilo, or like in Iloilo, it's a more intimate community in the sense that I don't think anonymity is something that you can really experience in Iloilo, which has its pros and it has its cons. But the good thing about that is that it's very
Could you repeat that, Nizza?
experience.
Could you repeat
My
that? The pros
tardiness.
and cons. Could you repeat the pros and cons
Okay.
again?
So the pros of that um, of my environment being more of an intimate environment now is that it's more tightly knit. Like not just my group of friends and not just my batch, but the college in general is very tightly knit compared to in college. I didn't feel that sort of like tightly knit interaction in the whole college. I just felt it within like our org or within my barkada, but not to the scale of like the whole college.
That's quite interesting. Like when you're in the big city, you feel like there's a more sense of individualism, I guess, since you're like there's just so many people around minding their own business. Whereas I think now, from what I understand of what you said, is that now that you're back home and the population is much smaller, it's a more of a collectivist, or like where it's a more of a close knit community, since you people are more probably reliant on one another, especially like in med, where it's very hard to be on your own in med. It's important to have that support group to keep you afloat.
That's also a caveat to what I just said, because undergrad culture is very different to college culture. So
Yeah.
maybe if I went to med school in Manila, I would be saying the same thing. I felt med school is more tightly knit than college, which it actually is. So I don't know how much of that is undergrad versus med school, and how much of that is NCR versus Western Visayas.
I feel it's probably more of the latter because I feel there from what you're talking about the close knit of your med school community. I think from what I've experienced interviewing other med students in different med schools here in Metro Manila, I think the sentiment is still the same. That like when you're in med school, people just naturally become closer because you're all having the same shared experience. Whereas like in college, everyone's taking their own course, everyone has their own ambitions, but here you're all striving for the same thing. So there's that common goal that's gluing you all together. Before we end this interview, is there anything you'd like to promote, Lisa? Like any business or your personal social media that you'd like to promote, or your friends' advocacies?
So actually, in the time that we're shooting this, I'm going to be launching a channel soon. So watch out for that. Maybe I'll send the link to Louise.
Yeah, I'll share any links. I'll share any links down. Could you give our viewers like a general overview of what your channel will be about?
So my channel is going to be more about trying to make medicine more approachable, because I feel like there's this misconception that medical students, all they do is study, and like they're such nerds, and like yeah, maybe we are nerds, but there are other things that we do other than study. So I just want people to, and like what I said earlier on, like what we've been talking about, it's really important to have a good work-life balance, because medicine isn't your life, it's just a part of it, and there are so many other aspects to who we are as people other than what we do for school or work. And that's something that I feel very strongly about.
Okay. So for any of you guys who are interested to check out Nizza's channel, I will leave links in the description. So go subscribe to her channel and go check out her videos. Okay, so with that, I'd like to thank you, Nizza, for your time and for spending the time to take part in this interview. I wish you all the best in your upcoming school year.
Thanks, Louise.
I hope you guys learned a lot about what it's like to be a student at WVSU. All relevant information mentioned during the video will be linked down in the description, and if you have any questions, please leave them as a comment down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.